Your Money or Your Life, an essay on money, time, and the quiet return of control. This book does not begin where most financial books begin. It does not open with ambition, growth, leverage, or opportunity. It begins with a question that feels almost inappropriate in a world obsessed with productivity and optimization. What is your life actually being exchanged for? At first glance, the question sounds rhetorical, even philosophical. But Your Money or Your Life insists that it is neither. It is a practical question, grounded in everyday decisions that most people make without reflection. The book's central claim is deceptively simple and deeply unsettling. Money is not an external tool we use to shape life. Money is life itself, converted into numbers. It is time, attention, physical energy, and emotional capacity condensed into currency. This is not meant as poetry. It is meant as accounting. Every dollar, euro, or ruble represents a portion of existence that has already been lived or will be lived in the future. To earn money, one must give up hours, days, and often years of life. These hours do not consist solely of time spent at work. They include preparation, commuting, recovery, stress, and the subtle erosion of attention that continues long after the workday ends. They include the evenings dulled by fatigue, the weekends shaped around recuperation, and the quiet compensations people purchase to make exhaustion bearable. When these costs are honestly tallied, the comforting narratives around income begin to collapse. A high salary no longer appears inherently impressive. It becomes a ratio. How much life is being exchanged for how much money? For many people, this ratio is shockingly poor. The book does not accuse. It simply asks the reader to look. And once one truly looks, it becomes difficult to unsee. The act of reframing money as life energy triggers a fundamental shift in perception. Purchases are no longer neutral transactions. They become exchanges of existence. A meal out is no longer just a price on a menu. It is a number of hours of one's life traded for a brief experience. A new device is not merely a convenience or status symbol. It is weeks or months of labor converted into an object that will eventually lose its novelty. This does not lead inevitably to frugality or denial. It leads to discernment. The book encourages the reader to ask a question so personal that it rarely appears in financial discussions. Is this worth my life? Not in a dramatic sense, but in a literal one. Is this object, service, or experience worth the time and energy that must be sacrificed to obtain it? When this question is taken seriously, spending becomes an ethical decision rather than a reflex. A significant portion of the book is devoted to examining why modern consumption feels so compulsory. People rarely consume purely out of need. More often, they consume to soothe, to compensate, or to conform. Work drains energy, and consumption is offered as relief. Stress accumulates, and spending promises reward. Social norms equate success with visible expenditure, reinforcing the belief that restraint signals failure or inadequacy. This dynamic creates a self-sustaining cycle. Increased work leads to exhaustion. Exhaustion leads to spending. Spending increases financial pressure. Financial pressure necessitates more work. Over time, life becomes an exercise in maintenance rather than engagement. Money, far from offering freedom, becomes the mechanism through which dependency is reinforced. The book challenges this cycle not by advocating withdrawal from society, but by introducing the concept of sufficiency. There exists, it argues, a point at which material needs are met, and additional consumption no longer improves quality of life. Before this point, money genuinely enhances well-being by providing safety, nourishment, shelter, and comfort. Beyond it, money often produces diminishing returns. Anxiety increases, commitments multiply, freedom contracts. The difficulty lies in the fact that this point of enough is not socially defined. Culture offers no clear signal that sufficiency has been reached. Instead, it promotes endless escalation. Without a consciously chosen stopping point, desire expands indefinitely and dissatisfaction becomes permanent. The book suggests that defining one's personal threshold of sufficiency is not an act of limitation, but an act of liberation. Clarity around values plays a central role in this process. Until individuals understand what genuinely matters to them, they remain vulnerable to external standards. They spend to meet expectations they did not choose, working to support lifestyles that do not reflect their priorities. Once values are articulated, spending begins to realign organically. Certain expenses lose their appeal, not because they are forbidden, but because they are revealed as irrelevant. Tracking money is introduced as a practical method for cultivating this awareness. Unlike traditional budgeting, which often relies on restriction and discipline, the tracking described in Your Money or Your Life serves as observation. It is not meant to control behavior directly, but to illuminate it. By recording income and expenses without judgment, individuals create a mirror in which their patterns become visible. This visibility produces change without coercion. When people see clearly how their life energy is allocated, many expenditures cease to justify themselves. Frugality emerges not as a moral stance, but as a natural response to understanding. Saving becomes easier, not because of increased willpower, but because unnecessary spending loses its emotional grip. Savings occupy a distinct and important position in the book's framework. They are not portrayed as a means to wealth accumulation or as a badge of discipline. Savings are described as a buffer against fear. They introduce space between a person and desperation. With savings, decisions can be made deliberately rather than reactively. The ability to say no increases. Dependence on external pressures decreases. This psychological dimension of savings is crucial. Financial reserves provide more than security. They provide agency. When individuals are no longer forced to trade immediately for survival, their relationship with work, consumption, and risk changes. They become less susceptible to manipulation by urgency and more capable of aligning actions with values. The book repeatedly emphasizes that frugality is not synonymous with deprivation. On the contrary, unnecessary spending often fails to produce lasting satisfaction while increasing obligations and anxiety. Conscious reduction of expenses frees resources beyond money, time, attention, and emotional bandwidth. Life becomes less cluttered, both materially and mentally. Minimalism is not presented as an ideology or aesthetic. It arises incidentally when usefulness replaces symbolism. Objects are evaluated not by the image they project, but by the life they support. As possessions decrease, so do the demands placed upon income. Less money is required to sustain fewer obligations, allowing more life to be lived rather than managed. Underlying the book's practical guidance is a broader philosophical stance on autonomy. Your Money or Your Life challenges the assumption that exhaustion is normal and dependency inevitable. It proposes that freedom is not achieved by earning more, but by requiring less. This is not a call to poverty or disengagement, but to intentionality. The book does not promise financial success in conventional terms. It offers coherence, a state in which money supports life rather than erodes it, a state in which decisions are guided by clarity rather than fear, a state in which the pace of life slows enough to be experienced. Once this perspective is internalized, unconscious spending becomes difficult, not because of guilt or external discipline, but because perception itself has changed. When money is understood as life energy, waste feels personal. Care becomes intuitive. In the end, the question the book leaves with the reader is not how much they earn, invest, or accumulate. It is how deliberately they live. Money, in this framework, is neither enemy nor idol. It is a tool whose rightful role is to serve life, not replace it. Your Money or Your Life is not a book to be skimmed for tactics. It is a book to be absorbed slowly, perhaps uncomfortably. Its value lies not in the novelty of its ideas, but in their permanence. Once the equation between money and life is accepted, it cannot be undone. And from that point forward, the relationship between work, consumption, and meaning begins to reorganize itself quietly but fundamentally. The quiet after enough. There is a moment the book does not describe directly, but inevitably leads to. It is the moment after enough has been recognized, not declared, not achieved, but quietly felt. It arrives without celebration. Nothing dramatic happens. Income may stay the same. The external shape of life may barely change. And yet something fundamental shifts inside. Before this moment, money carries emotional charge. It promises relief, escape, validation, or redemption. It feels urgent. It feels personal. Gains feel euphoric. Losses feel threatening. Every financial decision is loaded with meaning because it appears to determine whether life will improve or deteriorate. After enough, this charge weakens. Money does not disappear from importance, but it loses its power to define identity or safety. When basic needs are covered and fear recedes, money stops being a rescue mechanism. It becomes a tool again, useful, limited, and replaceable. This is the quiet after enough. In this space, something unexpected happens. Growth becomes optional. Consumption slows without effort. Choices lose their emotional edge. A person may notice that they no longer rush to optimize, upgrade, or extract more from every opportunity. Not because ambition has died, but because urgency has. The book implicitly prepares the reader for this state by removing the false drama around finances. When money is understood as life energy, excess activity begins to feel inefficient rather than exciting. Hustle appears less heroic. Accumulation looks less impressive. The constant drive to do more reveals itself as a response to anxiety rather than a genuine desire. In the quiet after enough, the nervous system relaxes. Decisions lengthen. Waiting becomes possible. Not every chance must be taken. Not every loss must be recovered. Time expands because it is no longer fully pre-sold to fear. This is perhaps the most radical implication of the book, that peace does not come from financial victory, but from financial sufficiency combined with awareness. The absence of pressure creates a different relationship with risk. A person who is not cornered does not gamble. A person who is not desperate does not chase. In this state, savings are no longer a goal. They are simply present. Spending is no longer moralized. It is contextual. Work becomes one activity among many, not the axis around which life rotates. The mind, no longer occupied with constant calculation, begins to notice subtler forms of wealth, unclaimed time, uninterrupted attention, the ability to stop. This quiet is not emptiness, it is space, and in that space, people often discover that many things they thought they wanted were substitutes for rest, for autonomy, for presence. When these needs are met directly, money loses much of its emotional burden. The book does not promise happiness, it promises alignment. And alignment produces a specific, understated form of satisfaction, the kind that does not spike or crash, but endures quietly in the background of life. The final gift of Your Money or Your Life is not financial literacy, but financial humility, an understanding that money is powerful but not infinite, useful but not sacred, necessary but not central. Once this hierarchy is restored, life regains its proper scale. Nothing spectacular follows, no transformation story, no triumphant ending. Just a calmer way of being in the world, where money no longer speaks louder than time, and life is no longer postponed in the name of security.